We are going to defend our mommy. The twin voices of Zoe and Mia Carter, age 6, echoed through the silent courtroom with a force that made Judge Patricia Henderson stop signing documents and look up in utter shock. Two identical girls were standing in the front row, braids with matching purple bows, Sunday dresses that were clearly their best clothes, slightly oversized patent leather shoes. Hands clasped together. Chins held high. Eyes shining with a determination that shouldn't exist in children so small. "Young ladies, please sit down," Judge Henderson said gently, but firmly. "This is family court. Adults are dealing with." "Adults are trying to take away our mommy," Mia interrupted, her voice trembling but not breaking. "And that is not fair." At the defense table, Shanice Carter, 32, covered her mouth with a trembling hand. Tears were already streaming down her face as she watched her daughters do the one thing she had begged them not to do. The public defender next to her, a young law school graduate who was clearly overwhelmed, looked completely lost. On the other side of the room, Richard Pemberton, the state social worker, adjusted his expensive tie and exchanged a look with the prosecution's lawyer. Both had an expression that said, "This is going to be easier than we thought." "Children do not understand the complexities of neglect cases," Richard muttered to the lawyer, loud enough to be heard. "It's exactly this type of uncontrolled behavior that proves the mother hasn't established proper boundaries." Zoe heard him. Her small body turned completely to face him. "Mommy taught us respect. But she also taught us to speak up when we see injustice. You are being unjust." An absolute silence fell over the courtroom. Judge Henderson leaned forward, genuinely intrigued now. In 15 years on the bench, she had never seen children so young articulate themselves like this. It had all started 6 weeks earlier. Shanice, a single mother working 2 jobs, a nursing assistant during the day, a cleaner at night, had left Zoe and Mia alone at home for 3 hours while she covered an emergency shift when a colleague fell ill. A neighbor had called Child Protective Services upon hearing crying through the thin wall. Richard Pemberton showed up at the door the next day with forms, questions, and a look that judged before listening. His report painted Shanice as a neglectful parent. "Pattern of chronic abandonment," he had written, ignoring that it was the first and only time in 6 years. "Children found in a state of extreme emotional distress." He failed to mention in the report that the crying was because Mia had a nightmare and Zoe was trying to comfort her. He failed to mention that the apartment was clean, the fridge had food, medications were organized, and honor roll schoolwork was taped to the wall. He failed to mention that when he asked the girls if their mother ever hurt them, they both looked at him as if he had grown a second head. "Our mommy is a hero," Zoe had said that day. "She saves people at the hospital and then she cleans buildings so we can have a home." Richard wrote in the report, "Children exhibit excessive attachment to the mother figure, a possible sign of unhealthy codependency." Now, 6 weeks later, the court was deciding whether Shanice would permanently lose her daughters. "Your Honor," the prosecution's lawyer stood up, her voice professional and cold. "The state has presented clear evidence of neglect. The mother left 2 6-year-old children alone for an extended period. This constitutes—" "3 hours," Zoe interrupted again, her voice clear. "Not an extended period. 3 hours because the hospital where mommy works called saying if she didn't go, she would lose her job. And she needs that job to feed us." "Young lady," the judge began. "Excuse me, Your Honor, but may I ask a question?" Mia took a step forward, her hand still holding Zoe's. "If mommy had money for a babysitter, would she have left us alone?" The question dropped like a bomb in the silent courtroom. Shanice closed her eyes, fresh tears streaming. The girls had promised to stay quiet. They promised to let the lawyers speak. But there they were, 6 years old, asking questions her public defender should have asked weeks ago. "The point is not," the prosecution's lawyer attempted. "The point is exactly that," Zoe said, her voice getting stronger. "Mommy is being punished for being poor. If she had money, she would have a babysitter. But she doesn't because she works 2 jobs, just so we can have an apartment." Richard Pemberton finally lost his patience. "Your Honor, this is a circus. The children have clearly been coached." "Nobody coached us," Mia cut in, turning to him with burning eyes. "We are only 6, but we are not stupid. And we know when adults are being mean just because they can." Judge Henderson tapped her gavel gently. "Order. Mrs. Carter, I appreciate your passion, but the court has procedures." Procedures that don't let us talk? Zoe asked, tilting her head. Is that what happens when a child doesn't have their own lawyer? The entire room froze. How did a 6-year-old know about separate legal representation? Shanice looked at her daughters with a mix of terrifying pride and fear. For weeks, ever since the social workers started visiting, the girls had been asking questions. Where would Mommy go if she lost the case? Where would they go? Who would decide? Shanice had answered honestly, perhaps too honestly. But she had no idea that Zoe and Mia were doing more than just asking. In the pink backpack under the bench where they sat, tucked beneath favorite blankets they brought for comfort, was a crumpled notebook. Pages filled with precarious childlike writing, drawings, and something else. Something that would completely change the direction of that case. Something the adults in that room, with all their diplomas and experience, never saw coming. If this story about two 6-year-old girls facing a system that judges poverty as a crime is touching your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what Zoe and Mia are about to reveal will not only save their family but expose a truth Richard Pemberton tried desperately to hide. Judge Henderson tapped the gavel again, this time with more authority. Mrs. Carter, do you understand that this court decides your future based on law, not on emotions? We understand, Zoe replied, her voice surprisingly steady for a 6-year-old. But the law is supposed to protect families, not destroy them for being poor. Richard Pemberton stood up abruptly, his face red. Your Honor, this is preposterous. Clearly someone put these words in these children's mouths. Nobody put anything, Mia interrupted, her small hands clenching into fists. Mommy doesn't even know we came prepared. She asked us to stay quiet. Tears started to form in her eyes. But we can't stay quiet when they are lying about her. Shanice buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Her public defender touched her arm gently but was clearly as lost as her client. Lying. The prosecution's lawyer, a 40-year-old woman named Christine Warren with an impeccable 87% win record in custody cases, raised an eyebrow. Young lady, Mr. Pemberton's report is based on verifiable facts. Incomplete facts, Zoe corrected, pulling the crumpled notebook from the pink backpack. There are facts Mr. Pemberton did not put in his report. The entire room leaned forward. Even the judge was visibly curious now. Richard felt cold sweat trickle down his back. That notebook. Where on earth did they get that? During home visits, he always made sure the girls were in another room when he spoke with Shanice. How could they have? Your Honor, Christine tried to regain control. 6-year-olds do not have the capacity to evaluate social service reports. We know how to read, Mia said simply. And listen. And see things that grown-ups think we don't. Zoe opened the notebook with reverent care. The pages were full of childish writing, large wobbly letters, misspelled words, but the content was unmistakable. Lists. Dates. Observations. When Mr. Pemberton first came, Zoe began, her voice growing more confident. He stayed in our apartment for 47 minutes. I counted. Me too, Mia added. Because Mommy taught us that when important grown-ups come, we pay attention. In the first 12 minutes, Zoe continued, consulting the notebook, he asked questions. In the other 35 minutes, he walked around the apartment writing things. But he did not write down everything he saw. Richard tried to interrupt. Your Honor, this is. He didn't write that the fridge had food, Mia said quickly. I saw him open the fridge and not write anything down. But in his report, it says inadequate food resources. Christine Warren frowned, flipping through the copy of the report in her hands. It does indeed say that. He didn't write that our beds had clean sheets, Zoe continued. Or that our bedroom wall has our honor roll certificates from school. Or that Mommy has a calendar on the fridge with all her medical appointments marked. These are subjective observations, Richard began, but his voice sounded less confident now. They are facts, Zoe retorted. Like the fact that he asked if Mommy left us alone before, and we said never, but in his report it says pattern of chronic abandonment. A heavy silence fell over the courtroom. Judge Henderson picked up her copy of the report and began reading it with renewed scrutiny. Shanice looked at her daughters with an expression that mixed shock and something more, a painful recognition. The twins had inherited from her not just her eyes and smile, but also a fierce determination. The same determination that made Shanice work 14 hours a day. The same determination that made her graduate nursing school while raising twin infants alone. "There's more," Mia said quietly, turning a page in the notebook. On the second visit, Mr. Pemberton came without warning. It was Saturday morning. We were eating breakfast. "Pancakes," Zoe specified. "Mommy makes pancakes every Saturday. 3 each with fruit." "But the report says inadequate morning nutrition observed during unannounced visit," Mia read laboriously from the notebook. Christine Warren checked the report again, her expression shifting slightly. "Mr. Pemberton, is that accurate?" "I interpreted the situation based on nutritional standards," Richard stammered. "Pancakes are not an adequate nutritional standard?" Judge Henderson asked, her voice taking on a skeptical tone that hadn't been there before. "They were whole wheat pancakes," Zoe added with deadly seriousness. "Because Mommy says we need fiber." Some muffled chuckles came from the court staff in the back. Even the judge hid a small smile before recovering her composure. Richard Pemberton felt the ground disappearing beneath his feet. In 12 years as a social worker, he had never been challenged by 6-year-olds. And he certainly had never been exposed by them. "Your Honor, may I suggest a recess?" Christine Warren requested, clearly realizing the case was unraveling. "To review these allegations." "They're not allegations," Mia said firmly. "They are truths Mr. Pemberton didn't want to see." Zoe turned another page, and this time her voice grew quieter, more emotional. "There's one thing he wrote that hurt Mommy the most." Shanice lifted her head, knowing exactly what was coming. In the report, Zoe read with difficulty, her little finger following the poorly copied words. It says, "Mother exhibits signs of emotional instability, frequently crying during interviews, suggesting an inability to cope with parental stress." Tears started to roll down Zoe's face now, but her voice remained steady. "Mommy cried because Mr. Pemberton said he was going to take us away. Any mother would cry if someone threatened to take her babies." Mia grabbed her sister's hand, her own tears falling. "Crying because you love someone doesn't mean you're weak. It means you have a heart." Absolute silence dominated the courtroom. Even Christine Warren looked away, clearly uncomfortable. Judge Henderson cleared her throat, emotion evident in her voice. "Mr. Pemberton, would you care to respond to these observations?" Richard opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Your Honor, my report followed all standard protocols." "Protocols that look for problems instead of seeing a family?" Zoe interrupted. "Because it looks like Mr. Pemberton only wrote down bad things and ignored all the good things." "Is there a protocol for that?" Mia asked with devastating innocence. "To only look for what is wrong." Christine Warren closed her documents folder with an audible snap. "Your Honor, I request a 30-minute recess to confer with my client." But before the judge could answer, Zoe said something that made the entire room freeze. "There's one thing we haven't told yet. About why Mr. Pemberton really wants to take Mommy from us." Richard visibly paled. "This is ridiculous." "It's about numbers," Mia said quietly. "Numbers we heard him saying on the phone when he thought we were asleep during the last visit." What exactly had these 6-year-old girls overheard? And how had 2 small children managed to document flaws in an official report that experienced lawyers hadn't questioned? In the pink backpack, there were still more pages in that notebook. Pages that contained not just children's observations, but something more disturbing. Something that would explain why Richard Pemberton seemed so desperate to remove Shanice Carter from her daughters. And it had to do with money no one knew existed. Judge Henderson leaned forward, her attention now completely captured. "Numbers? What numbers, young ladies?" Zoe and Mia exchanged a look, that silent communication twins have, deciding something without words. Finally, Mia nodded. "It was 3 weeks ago," Zoe began, flipping to a specific page of the notebook where a childish drawing showed a clock marking 9:30 night. "Mr. Pemberton came to do a surprise check. He said he needed to see where we slept. Mommy put us to bed," Mia continued, "but we couldn't sleep because we were worried. So we kept listening." Richard Pemberton was visibly sweating now. "Your Honor, private conversations are not." "You were in our house," Zoe cut him off, looking directly at him. "Talking very loudly. It wasn't a private conversation if it happened in our living room." Christine Warren placed a hand on Richard's arm, signaling for him to be quiet, but concern was evident on her face. "We heard you talking on the phone with someone named Dan," Mia said, consulting the notebook where the name was written in large, crooked letters. "You said, 'This Carter case is perfect. Single mother, no resources, no family. The system will make placement easy.'" The room became so silent you could hear every person's breathing. "And then," Zoe continued, her voice trembling slightly, "you said something about a placement bonus." Richard stood up so abruptly that his chair almost fell over. "That is absurd. These children clearly misunderstood. 500 per child, 1,000 if they are placed together," Mia recited, the words clearly memorized because they were too young to fully grasp the meaning. "You said exactly that." Judge Henderson struck her gavel, but not to silence the girls. "Mr. Pemberton, sit down. Now." Shanice lifted her head for the first time in minutes, confusion and anger growing on her face. "What are they saying? You get money for taking my daughters." "Your Honor, this is a grotesque misunderstanding," Richard began, but his voice broke slightly. "It's not a misunderstanding," Zoe said firmly. "Because then you laughed and said, 'These are the easy ones.' No real abuse evidence, just neglect from poverty. The court always approves." Christine Warren was now frantically flipping through documents, clearly looking for something. When she found it, her face paled. "Mr. Pemberton," she said quietly, but audibly, "your employer, Green Valley Family Services, is a private organization contracted by the state, correct?" "Yes, but..." "An organization that receives funding based on the number of children placed into the adoption system?" Richard did not answer. He didn't need to. His silence was answer enough. Judge Henderson picked up the phone on her desk. "Bailiff, I need you to call the State Department of Child Services. Immediately." She hung up and looked directly at Richard. "Mr. Pemberton, you are under an order not to leave this courtroom." "Your Honor, I have rights. And these children have the right to a social worker who places their welfare above financial incentives," the judge cut in, her voice sharp as steel. "Continue, young ladies. What else did you hear?" Mia looked at the notebook, her little finger trembling slightly as she pointed to the next entry. "You also said that the faster we process cases, the more children we move through the system. And that a black single mother with no decent lawyer is a guaranteed case." The words fell like bombs in the courtroom. Staff in the back gasped in shock. Even Shanice's public defender, who had been practically silent the whole time, had tears of anger in her eyes. "6 weeks ago," Zoe said quietly, turning to a different page full of drawings and misspelled words, "when this all started, we didn't understand what was happening. We just knew a man was trying to say Mommy was bad." "But Mommy is not bad," Mia added, her voice breaking. "She works so hard. Always tired, but she never complains. She always makes time to read us bedtime stories even when she can barely keep her eyes open." Shanice was openly sobbing now, but these were different tears. Not of defeat, but of overwhelming pride mixed with the pain of seeing her little daughters carry such a burden. "So we started paying attention," Zoe explained. "Every time Mr. Pemberton came, we wrote it down. What he asked. What he saw. What he didn't see." "Mommy has a box under her bed," Mia said, "with letters from her supervisor at the hospital saying she is an exemplary employee. With our school report cards, all with gold stars. With rent bills showing she's never been late on a payment." "Mr. Pemberton saw the box," Zoe added, consulting the notebook. "On the 3rd visit. He opened it, looked inside, closed it. He didn't put any of that in the report." Christine Warren was now visibly uncomfortable. "Your Honor, I request that this case be suspended pending a full investigation." "We're not finished," Mia interrupted with firm politeness. "There's one more thing. The most important thing." Richard Pemberton looked like he wanted to be anywhere but in that courtroom. Sweat trickled down his temples, his expensive tie seemed to be choking him. 2 weeks ago," Zoe said, her voice growing stronger, "we went with Mommy to the grocery store. We saw Mr. Pemberton there. He was with the other man, Dan from the phone. We knew it was him because we heard Mr. Pemberton call his name," Mia explained. "And they were talking about us." "Carter is in the bag," Zoe recited, the words clearly memorized. Judge Henderson is predictable on neglect cases. 2 weeks at most, and the children enter the system. And then, Mia continued, her small body trembling now, Dan asked something about other families in the queue. And you showed him a list on your phone. A list with names. Zoe opened the last page of the notebook. There, in shaky child writing, were 5 names. We copied them before you saw us. Christine Warren took the notebook and read the names aloud to the judge. Each name was followed by small observations: single mom, no resources, no lawyer. Are these other families? Judge Henderson asked, her voice dangerously calm. Your Honor, this is a complete violation of, Richard tried. Of professional ethics? Of public trust? Of the fundamental rights of these families. The judge finished for him. I completely agree. The courtroom door opened. 2 investigators from the State Department of Child Services entered, clearly having been called ahead of time by the judge's assistant. Behind them, to everyone's surprise, stood a woman in her late 50s whom Shanice instantly recognized. Ms. Paula Mitchell, Shanice whispered. My supervisor at the hospital. Paula Mitchell walked up to the front of the court with a thick folder of documents. Your Honor, I apologize for the intrusion, but when I heard Shanice Carter's hearing was today, I felt compelled to come. And who are you? Judge Henderson asked. I have been the nurse supervisor at Metropolitan Hospital for 15 years. Shanice has worked under my supervision for 6 years. Paula opened the folder. When Mr. Pemberton contacted me as part of his investigation, I provided a detailed letter of recommendation, Shanice's impeccable attendance records, and documentation of all the commendations she has received. There is no letter from you in the file for this case, Christine Warren said, checking documents frantically. Exactly, Paula replied, her voice hard. Which made me question what other information Mr. Pemberton chose to omit. Richard was now visibly pale. It must have been an administrative error. An error? Paula interrupted him. I left 3 voicemails for you, Mr. Pemberton. 3. You never returned one. Judge Henderson picked up her phone again. I want a full audit of every one of Mr. Pemberton's cases for the last 2 years. Every report, every placement, every family. She looked at Richard with something akin to disgust. Especially cases involving low-income single mothers. There's one more thing, Zoe said quietly, the final undetonated bomb. In the backpack. Mia pulled out a crumpled envelope. We found this in the trash bin the last time Mr. Pemberton came. Mommy had thrown it away because she thought it was junk mail. But it wasn't junk mail. It was an official letter from a law firm offering free legal representation to Shanice Carter in her custody case. This letter, Paula said, recognizing the letterhead, was from a pro bono program I recommended to Shanice myself. I explained how it worked, gave her the address, even filled out the initial form. Shanice said she never received a response. Christine Warren took the envelope. The postmark showed the date, 3 weeks ago. The return address confirmed it was a legitimate law office. How did this letter, Christine asked carefully, end up in Ms. Carter's household trash? A heavy silence. Then Zoe said something that connected all the dots. Mr. Pemberton brought Mommy's mail that day. He said the mailman handed it to him by mistake because he was visiting the building. Mommy trusted him and threw the junk mail away without looking. The courtroom erupted. Judge Henderson banged her gavel repeatedly. Order. Order. When silence finally fell, the judge looked at Richard Pemberton with an expression that would make hardened criminals recoil. Mr. Pemberton, you are suspended immediately from all duties. The investigators will escort you to provide a full statement. Your Honor, I have the right. The right to remain silent, the judge completed. I suggest you use it. As Richard was escorted out, Zoe and Mia finally let their masks of bravery fall. They ran to their mother, who swept them into her arms, all 3 of them crying. But they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of something more powerful. Relief. Vindication. An unlikely victory won by 2 6-year-old girls who refused to let the system crush their family. Judge Henderson waited for the door to close behind Richard Pemberton before speaking. When she did, her voice carried the weight of 15 years of seeing injustices, but also something new, hope. Ms. Carter, please rise. Shanice stood up, trembling, with Zoe and Mia clinging to her legs. Her public defender also rose, still processing everything she had just witnessed. Based on the evidence presented here today, the judge began, not only by the testimony of these extraordinary young women, but by the documented omissions and blatant misconduct of a state social worker, this court finds that the petition for removal of custody is denied. Shanice covered her mouth, a sob escaping. Zoe and Mia hugged her tighter, their small faces buried against her. Furthermore, the judge continued, her voice growing stronger, I order a full investigation into Green Valley Family Services and all cases overseen by Richard Pemberton. I want a full report in 30 days. Christine Warren stood up. Your Honor, on behalf of the state, I offer deep apologies to Ms. Carter and her daughters. There has clearly been a systemic failure here that. Failure. Paula Mitchell interrupted from the gallery. That was not a failure. That was intentional sabotage. And I'll bet Shanice is not the only victim. Judge Henderson nodded gravely. I concur. Ms. Warren, will the state compensate Ms. Carter for the trauma and legal costs of this travesty? I will personally recommend to the Attorney General that. I don't want money, Shanice suddenly said, her voice rough with emotion but firm. I want a guarantee that no other mother goes through this. I want the system to change. A respectful silence fell over the courtroom. And it will change, a male voice said from the door. A man in his early 60s, wearing an immaculate suit, walked in with purpose. I am Gerald Hammond, the State Child Services Ombudsman. I was monitoring this case remotely after receiving an anonymous tip 3 days ago. A tip? The judge asked, surprised. Gerald looked directly at Zoe and Mia. From 2 very brave 6-year-old girls who called the state hotline using the public library phone. Shanice looked down, shocked. You when? After school, Mia admitted quietly. The librarian, Mrs. Chun, helped us. She said we had the right to report when an adult was being unfair. We told them everything, Zoe added. About the phone conversation, about the lost letter, about Mr. Pemberton only looking for bad things. Gerald opened his own folder. Based on that tip, we launched a preliminary investigation. What we discovered in the last 72 hours is alarming. He handed documents to the judge. In 2 years, Richard Pemberton processed 47 custody removal cases. Approval rate, 89%. The national average rate, 34%. The numbers dropped like stones in the silent courtroom. More disturbing, Gerald continued, 42 of those 47 cases involved low-income single mothers. 38 were women of color. And in every single case, Green Valley Family Services received a state placement bonus, a program supposedly encouraging successful adoptions, but which Mr. Pemberton clearly manipulated. How many families, Shanice asked, her voice cracking, were destroyed for money? Too many, Gerald admitted. But thanks to your daughters, we can now begin to fix this. He turned to the judge. I recommend an immediate review of all 47 cases. Families deserve a new hearing with adequate representation. I concur, the judge said. And Ms. Carter? She looked at Shanice with genuine respect. The court recognizes that you are not just a capable mother, but an exceptional one. Raising 2 girls with the courage and integrity they demonstrated today, that is a testament to your character. Tears were streaming freely down Shanice's face now. But there is a practical matter we need to address, the judge continued gently. Ms. Carter, I understand you work 2 jobs to support your family? Yes, Your Honor. And the original incident, leaving the girls alone, happened because you had no child care alternative? Shanice nodded, ashamed. Paula Mitchell stood up again. Your Honor, if I may speak? Metropolitan Hospital has an employee assistance program Shanice is unaware of. We can offer a subsidy for daycare, flexible hours, and even assistance with continuing education if she wants to advance her career. I didn't know that, Shanice whispered. Many don't, Paula admitted. Because the system wasn't designed to help. It was designed to punish poverty. She looked at Gerald. Perhaps that needs to change too. Gerald nodded. It's already underway. We are proposing legislation to require social workers to provide assistance resources before considering custody removal. The courtroom door opened again. A young woman in her mid-30s quickly entered, apologizing for the delay. "Your Honor, I am Rebecca Torres, from the law firm Morrison & Associates. We represent Ms. Carter pro bono from this point forward." "The letter," Shanice said, recognizing the firm's logo. "Exactly," Rebecca confirmed. "When we didn't receive a reply, we assumed you weren't interested. Only today, when Ombudsman Hammond contacted us about the investigation, did we realize what had happened." She looked at Zoe and Mia. These young women didn't just save their own family. They exposed corruption affecting hundreds of families. "We didn't want to be heroes," Mia said quietly. "We just wanted to keep our family together." "And you succeeded," the judge said with a rare kindness. "But you did more than that. You changed a system." Gerald turned to the gallery, where several reporters had quietly entered. "This story needs to be told. It needs to go national. Because if it happened here, it's happening all across the country." "It already is," a female voice said from the door. A national network investigative journalist entered with a camera crew. "Do we have permission to film, Your Honor?" The judge looked at Shanice, who looked at her daughters. Zoe and Mia exchanged a look, the silent communication of twins, and nodded. "Yes," Shanice said. "If it helps other families, yes." In the following weeks, the story exploded nationally. 6-year-old twins expose child services corruption was the headline in every major newspaper. The court video, with special permission due to public interest, went viral with 35 million views. But it was not a cost-free victory. Richard Pemberton, facing multiple criminal charges, tried to defend himself. He appeared on a news program claiming to be the scapegoat for a broken system. "I didn't invent the rules," he told the camera. "I just followed the incentives the state created. If there's a problem, it's with the system, not with me." But the interview backfired when the reporter asked about the intercepted letter. I was protecting the child from lawyers who might prolong the trauma. Or protecting the commissions you would receive for a fast placement." The reporter cut him off. Richard had no answer. Green Valley Family Services attempted damage control. The organization's CEO, a man named Daniel Green, the Dan from the phone calls, appeared at a press conference claiming that one rogue employee does not represent the company's values. But Gerald Hammond's investigation revealed otherwise. Internal emails showed that the pressure to increase placement numbers came directly from leadership. Bonuses were calculated on shared spreadsheets. Monthly quotas were imposed. "This wasn't one bad apple," Gerald said in a televised interview. "It was an entire orchard poisoned by greed." In criminal court, Richard Pemberton faced 23 charges: fraud, mail interception, falsifying official reports. Daniel Green faced another 15 as a conspirator. But the real justice came from elsewhere. All 47 families processed by Richard were given new hearings. 17 children were reunited with parents who had unjustly lost custody. 23 cases were completely reversed. And 7 families, those where real abuse existed, finally received adequate support instead of just punishment. A mother named Teresa Rodriguez, who had lost her 2 children 3 years earlier for neglect, she couldn't afford winter heating, was reunited with them in an emotional ceremony. When a reporter asked how she felt, she just said, "Thank you, Zoe and Mia. You gave me back my babies." The impact spread beyond that state. 17 states initiated similar investigations into private child services organizations. 3 states passed the Zoe and Mia law, legislation requiring social workers to document offered resources before considering removal. And the placement incentive program? It was canceled nationally 3 months after the hearing, replaced by a system focusing on family reunification. But for Zoe, Mia, and Shanice, the most significant change was personal. Shanice accepted a promotion at the hospital, now a lead nurse with fixed daytime hours. The salary allowed for a bigger apartment, with the twins getting their own room. She no longer needed the second job. "I get to have dinner with my daughters every day," she said in an interview, tears of joy streaming. Something so simple, yet it seemed impossible before. Zoe and Mia went back to just being children. But children who knew their voices mattered. And Richard Pemberton? He was sentenced to 3 years in prison and permanently barred from working with children. Daniel Green received 5 years and a $2 million fine. But perhaps the harshest punishment was that, when Richard was released, he found that his story had become a case study in social work schools nationwide. A perfect example of how not to act. His legacy would not be the careers he built, but the families he destroyed. And the 6-year-old twins who had the courage to expose him. 2 years after that transformative hearing, Zoe and Mia Carter, now 8 years old, stood on a stage in a packed auditorium in Washington, D.C., holding hands as they always did when nervous. But they were not there as victims. They were there as agents of change. When we were 6, Zoe began, her voice more confident now but still carrying a childish sweetness, we thought grown-ups always knew what was right. We thought the system always protected children. We learned that's not true, Mia continued, looking out at the audience of legislators, social workers, lawyers, and child advocates. We learned that sometimes the system hurts the families it's supposed to help. They were speaking at the National Child Welfare Conference, special guests presenting on child protection services reform. Shanice was in the front row, wearing her supervisory nurse uniform, another promotion, this time to Director of Pediatric Nursing Training at Metropolitan Hospital. Next to her, Paula Mitchell smiled proudly. And beside them, Rebecca Torres, the lawyer who had taken their case, now led an entire department dedicated to family reunification cases. Since our story went public, Zoe explained, pointing to slides on the screen behind them, 687 families in 31 states have contacted our foundation. Families who thought they were alone. Families who thought no one would believe them. And every one of those stories matters, Mia added with a seriousness that seemed impossible for an 8-year-old. Because behind every number is a child who just wants their mom or dad. There's a family that is struggling but loving. The Zoe and Mia Foundation, established with donations after the story went viral, provided free legal assistance to low-income families facing child services investigations. In 2 years, it had helped 143 families avoid unjust removals and reunited 67 children with their parents. But numbers don't tell the whole story, Zoe said, switching slides to show photos. This is Teresa Rodriguez and her children. Separated for 3 years because she couldn't afford heating. Reunited 18 months ago. The photo showed a Latina woman hugging 2 small boys, all crying tears of joy. This is James Wilson, Mia continued to the next photo. A single father who lost custody of his daughter because he worked a night shift and had no babysitter. Now he has daytime hours and she's home. Photo after photo. Story after story. Each one proof that poverty is not neglect, but that the system often treats it as if it were. The question we are always asked, Zoe said, looking directly at the audience, is, how did 6-year-old children know what to do? And the answer is simple, Mia completed. Our mom taught us something every child should know: you have a voice. And when someone tries to take that voice away, you shout louder. Applause erupted through the auditorium. But the twins weren't finished yet. There are 2 things we want to say today, Zoe continued when silence returned. First, to children who are watching and going through something similar. She looked directly at the camera broadcasting the event live. You are not alone. You are not too small to matter. And there are people who will listen if you speak up. The second thing, Mia said, turning to the adults in the audience, is for you. Social workers, judges, lawyers, legislators. A small dramatic pause. The system you created is broken. But you can fix it. Zoe clicked to the final slide showing a list of changes their advocacy had helped implement. Zoe and Mia law passed in 23 states. Placement bonus program eliminated nationally mandatory legal representation for families in custody cases in 15 states. Mandatory implicit bias training for social workers in 31 states. $47 million in federal funds redirected from removal to family preservation services. But there's still work to do, Mia said. Because even now, as we speak, there is a child being taken from a loving family because that family is poor. There is a mother crying because she can't afford a babysitter. There is a father losing his child because the system judges financial hardship as a moral failing. And that needs to end, Zoe concluded firmly. Not in 10 years. Not in 5 years. Now. A thunderous standing ovation. Legislators stood, tears visible on many faces. But applause meant little if it didn't come with action. After the presentation, a senator named Patricia Williams approached. Ms. Carter, I am introducing a bill in the Senate next week. Federal legislation requiring assistance resources before removal in all non-emergency cases. Would you be willing to testify? Zoe and Mia exchanged a look, the silent communication of twins, and nodded. Yes, they said in unison. But the best moment of the day wasn't the stage or the senators. It was when Teresa Rodriguez appeared backstage with her two sons. You, Teresa said, kneeling to be at the twins' height, tears already falling, you gave me back my babies. How can I ever thank you? You don't have to thank us, Mia said, hugging her. Just love them. That's all any child wants. That night, in the bigger apartment Shanice could now afford, the Carter family ate dinner together as they had every night for 2 years. No more night shifts. No more panic about how to pay the rent. No more fear of a knock at the door. Mommy, Zoe asked as she helped wash dishes, do you think we made a difference? Shanice paused, looking at the daughter who had saved their family with nothing but a crumpled notebook and courage. My love, you changed the world. We didn't change the whole world, Mia corrected from the living room, always the more realistic one. There are still too many families suffering. Then we keep fighting, Shanice said simply, joining them. Until there aren't any more. 3 months later, the Carter Family Preservation Act, officially named in honor of Zoe and Mia, passed in Congress with an overwhelming bipartisan majority. The president signed it in a White House ceremony, with the twins standing beside him, holding commemorative pens. These young women reminded us, the president told the cameras, that the most vulnerable among us are often the wisest. That justice has no minimum age. And that courage comes in all sizes. Richard Pemberton watched the ceremony from prison. 2 years into a 3-year sentence. When a cellmate asked him what he did to be there, Richard didn't answer. How could he explain that he had been destroyed by 2 6-year-old girls? Daniel Green, former CEO of Green Valley Family Services, also watched, from the tiny apartment where he lived alone after losing everything. His company had gone bankrupt under the weight of lawsuits. His reputation destroyed. His marriage ended. All because of greed that seemed so justifiable at the time. They were just numbers, he muttered to himself, but knowing it was a lie. They were never just numbers. They were always families. They were always children. 6 years after the hearing that changed everything, Zoe and Mia Carter, now 12 years old, were in a classroom like any preteen. But when the teacher asked the class to discuss a moment that changed your life, they both knew exactly what to say. When we were 6, Zoe began, we learned that voice matters more than age. That courage doesn't wait for permission. And that loving someone means fighting for them, even when it's scary. And we learned, Mia added, that the system can be changed. But it doesn't change by itself. It changes when people refuse to accept injustice. The teacher, who knew their story, smiled. And what would you say to a child going through something similar now? The twins looked at each other, that moment of silent communication, and answered together, speak up. Document. Fight. You are stronger than you think. Shanice Carter, now 38, was a program director at Metropolitan Hospital who trained nurses to identify signs of true neglect versus poverty. She lectured nationally on the difference between families who need intervention and families who need support. Most families the system labels as neglectful, she would say at conferences, are just poor families. And poverty is not a crime. It's not a moral failing. It's a circumstance that can be changed with support, not punishment. Paula Mitchell retired from the hospital but dedicated her full time to the Zoe and Mia Foundation, serving as its executive director. Under her leadership, the foundation expanded to 45 states, helping over 2,000 families stay together. Rebecca Torres became a judge, the first in the state to specialize exclusively in family preservation cases. On her bench, the priority was simple: reunite families when possible, protect children when necessary, and always, always, provide resources before considering removal. I learned from 2 6-year-old girls, she would often say, that justice without compassion is not justice. It is merely power exercised against the vulnerable. Gerald Hammond, the ombudsman who investigated Richard Pemberton, was promoted to Secretary of State Child Services. His first action: completely eliminate for-profit organizations from child protection services. Child welfare, he declared at his first press conference, cannot have a financial motive. Period. And Teresa Rodriguez? She graduated with a degree in social work, dedicating her career to helping Latina families navigate a system that had almost destroyed hers. Her office had a framed photo, her with her 2 sons, hugging Zoe and Mia on reunification day. "They saved me," Teresa would tell every new family she served. "And now it's my turn to save you." 10 years after that day in court, Zoe and Mia Carter, now 16, were accepted into all 10 universities they applied to. Full scholarships. But their decision was unanimous. "We're going to law school," Zoe announced in an interview for a local newspaper. "Because the system still isn't perfect. And someone needs to keep fighting." "But this time," Mia added with a smile, "we'll be lawyers. With degrees and everything." If this story of courage, determination, and the power of children's voices has inspired you, subscribe to the channel. Because Zoe and Mia taught us that change doesn't come from waiting for adults to act. It comes from refusing to be silent when we witness injustice. It comes from documenting the truth when others lie. And it comes from loving so fiercely that no system, no matter how powerful, can break that love. Richard Pemberton destroyed families for greed. He ended up destroying only himself. Daniel Green built an empire by profiting from the pain of others. The empire fell, and he with it. But Zoe and Mia Carter, 2 6-year-old girls with a crumpled notebook and infinite courage, built a legacy that saved thousands. Because they learned that true strength does not come from power or position. It comes from knowing that you matter. That your voice deserves to be heard. And that when you fight for love, not for money, you have already won. The system judged Shanice Carter as an inadequate mother because she was poor. But her daughters proved that real wealth is not in a bank account. It is in the character that teaches children to stand up when the world tries to knock them down. And that lesson, that fundamental truth, echoed far beyond a courtroom on an ordinary afternoon. It echoed in 687 families reunited. It echoed in 23 states that changed laws. It echoed in millions of children who learned that age is never a barrier to justice. When someone tries to silence you by saying you are too young, too small, too insignificant, remember Zoe and Mia. Remember that 2 6-year-old girls changed an entire nation. Remember that their voice mattered when no one else wanted to listen. And remember that your voice matters too. It always has. It always will.